Who says scary can't be funny, right? I mean, seriously, there's plenty of good horror comedies out there. And that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to give my top 5 list. Once again, top 5 of what I think the best horror comedies are. Yep. Doesn't matter whether it's gruesome, scary, it just has to have some comedic value in it to be, well, a horror comedy, as the description says. Yep. Just keep in mind, people, this is strictly my opinion, so if you don't agree with me, then oh well. But I think most of you can agree with me on this list. Let's get to it, shall we? Let's get our smiley, scary faces on with some laughs. Starting with number 5, Shaun of the Dead. Yes, a spoof comedy film about zombie apocalypses. Now, this originally sounded like a rather gimmicky concept. Yes, Shaun of the Dead, which sounds like a play on word of Dawn of the Dead. I didn't think much of it when I first heard about it. I mean, we all thought it was a joke. But surprisingly, it succeeded. Because, yeah, spoof films nowadays are not very well received. I mean, we've had a few which are good, but for the most part, nowadays, they're just pure crap. They're poorly written, poorly executed with comedy. I mean, it seems like they just throw random stuff in here nowadays. But this film is an exception, though it does actually have a plot. And Simon Pegg as Shaun himself, yes, it wouldn't be called Shaun of the Dead without our main character being called Shaun. He basically goes from a zero to a hero out of nowhere when, in a bar, he does basically nothing with his life, and all of a sudden, a zombie apocalypse outbreaks and, well, he has to play hero and outrun it. Through some slapstick and comedy and blood and horror, it does the job right there. It's funny and scary at the same time. I don't have to explain much. Go see it for yourself. It's a bloody good, awesome zombie killing time. Maybe not the only one. Spoiler alert there. Number 4. Young Frankenstein. Yes, another horror comedy spoof film, and this is probably the earliest example of one, starring not only Mel Brooks, who also directed the movie, but also the sadly deceased Gene Wilder, who we probably remember as the original classic Willy Wonka. And man, this duo is fantastic in this film. And for the one thing that makes this film so great is, unlike spoof comedies, which I'll mention again many times, and why they're not so great is because they throw stuff into all these films carelessly. This film, it doesn't do that at all. It knows what to do, and it goes in the right direction by, first of all, putting it in black and white, creating the right mood and atmosphere, not trying to distract too heavily from what it's trying to focus on, what it's obviously trying to parody. Yeah, it's obviously parodying Frankenstein. The scares, but mostly laughs in this film, are simply genius. The way Gene Wilder acts, how he acts all insane and crazy and over the top, he just pulls it off in such a perfect manner that can't be explained. It has to be watched to be believed. Trust me, it's probably one of the first best spoof films ever made, in my opinion. So, go see it for yourself. Can't say much more there. Other than, it's alive. Yeah. So, go see it for yourself, people. Number 3, Zombieland. Yes, yes. Another horror comedy with zombies. And why not this one, right? You probably saw this one coming, didn't you? Yep, kind of figured. And I already included this and Shaun of the Dead on my best zombies movie list from several years ago, to be exact. And, well, I ain't got much to say about this one. It's a great, well put together film starring Jesse Eisenberg as pretty much the straight college student that the brainy guy follows all a set of rules, which are very clever how they keep popping up every time he follows them or every time somebody breaks one. It's hilarious, like cardio, wearing a seatbelt, and all that kind of stuff. You got Woody Harrelson, who's pretty much the loose cannon, but also comic relief in this film. I mean, you can't help but laugh at all the outbursts that he has. All that most of the time for a freaking Twinkie. I mean, why not, right? I mean, you gotta cherish the little things in life, even if in a post-apocalyptic world. And the two girls, played by both Abigail Breslin, who you probably remember from Little Miss Sunshine, that big hit comedy film, and of course Emma Stone, who obviously you've probably seen in the Amazing Spider-Man movies and La La Land. So yeah, I ain't got much to say. It's a great horror comedy, some pretty epic moments, and for an hour and a half runtime, thoroughly more than entertaining. The character chemistry between all four of them, how they don't get along at first, how they fight, and then they just straight up have a good time on the road while pretty much just driving, well, to live out life. Because you realize, yeah, if you don't live life, you're a zombie. And Ain't got much to say there. A couple of predictable moments, and some scary moments too as well, especially the flashback scene. I think that was probably the moment that made me to jump the most the first time I saw this, when, his college roommate just all of a sudden becomes a zombie, and damn, that made me jump. And of course, a cameo from Bill Murray himself. Yeah, playing Bill Murray. That alone made the $10 ticket to see this movie in theaters worth it right there. I mean, I ain't got much to say there. So, in other words, definitely worth it. And hell, it even took 10 years for this film to get a sequel, Zombieland Double Tap. And, well, I just recently saw it, and to keep it short, sweet, to the point, it was really good. Trust me, people. I know it was kind of a mixed bag among critics, but it's worth it. It's, well, not as scary as the first one, but it's definitely fun. It brings the original characters back, and new ones in the picture as well. So definitely go see it. But otherwise, this film, good, scary, funny, zombie-killing time. Yep. Nut up or shut up. Number 2, Gremlins franchise. Yeah, I can't decide between them two. I'm going to include both of them. Well, particularly I recommend the first one, even though the second one I think is very underrated. So I say watch both of them. Well, the first one definitely has a much more subtle and more serious tone to it, being that, well, not only it's dark and kind of terrifying and gruesome, but it's also funny too as well, and not to mention, it's a Christmas movie. Yeah, you can't ignore that fact right there, because there's snow, there's decorations, lights and everything like that. And of course, well, you see gremlins wreak havoc amongst the town. And where does it all start? It starts from a little furry guy named Gizmo, a little cute little guy that if you get him wet, he multiplies into more than one of them, more vicious-like versions of the Mogwai that obviously want to be fed after midnight, which, yeah, obviously if you feed them after midnight, they morph into these disgusting little green creatures called the gremlins. Yeah, so that's where they come from. Oh, and also, if they get exposed to bright light, it pretty much hurts them or dazes them. If they get exposed to sunlight, then it kills them. So that's the whole story behind it. Gremlins get on the loose after one pretty much jumps in the pool and, well, multiply in a whole bunch, and the whole town gets practically destroyed. This little small town, which in real life is actually the same town used in Back to the Future. Yeah, Hill Valley itself, right by where the clock tower set is in the Universal backlot. But not to get too carried away, yeah, that's where it takes place in the first movie. Definitely great, definitely funny, gruesome, and yeah, of course this was one of the first movies to actually contribute to the whole PG-13 rating thing, because it was PG rated and parents were outraged by the fact that it's disgusting looking, the gremlin melts at the end. You pretty much know how it ends right there, and how violent it was. This, and of course the second Indiana Jones movie, Temple of Doom. But yeah, this is not only a great horror comedy that's gruesome, but it's also funny, and it's one of the only few films that you actually feel entertained and root for the monsters in a way. I mean, they're just so much fun to watch. Yeah, they destroy the town, and they terrorize people, but they do a lot of funny stuff that you just can't help but laugh at. It's genius. The animatronic effects still hold up well for today's standards. Compared to what they use for effects nowadays with CGI, it just doesn't compare to good old practical effects. And then with the second film, you think this film's a comedy. This film is even more of a comedy, as I mentioned before. Yeah, it not only does bring most of the it brings Gizmo back, after, of course, the same Chinese guy from the first movie that they bought the Mogwai from, because he takes him back at the end of the first one. He apparently passes away, so he goes into and gets abducted by these scientists in a big utopia-like building in New York City. So it's like a city within itself, basically. And of course, the same character, Billy, and of course his girlfriend, played by Phoebe Cates, is back. A bunch of new characters, which I think my favorite new character is Daniel Clamp, the owner of the building, who's like a big dream visionarist, tries to create like the future and everything. His ideas are just great, but he puts all this useless technology in here, and it's great to see the gremlins destroy it. And yeah, they come back because Gizmo gets wet, multiplies, and all hell breaks loose, except Billy this time knows about like what's yet to come, and tries to keep them from exiting the city. But the laughs that you get out of this film are so genius. I love how it pokes fun at itself, like how he's trying to tell the people, like they can't eat after midnight, and I especially like the gags with the movie critic that gives the first film a bad review, which is pretty hilarious, where you coincidental and the gremlins attack him. You have all different gremlins that drink out of these genetic things, and they morph into like different stuff. Like you got a bat gremlin, which leaves a Batman symbol in the wall when he goes outside because he gets the sunblock. You get the talking gremlin that drinks the brain stuff. You got the female gremlin, you got the vegetable gremlin, you got the electric gremlin, and even a freaking spider gremlin, which is basically like the reincarnation of the striped gremlin, the leader of them all. And like the first movie, it does kind of repeat itself a little bit with Gizmo fighting back at him. With the first movie, I forget what film it was, he uses the car that he watched on TV. In this film, he tries to be like Rambo and uses a bow and arrow he makes out of paperclip and rubber band and everything like that, and sets it on fire. The gags and everything, once again, are hilarious. You can't help but once again be entertained and root for these gremlins. I mean, you just love them all the way to the end, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the third movie can bring. I'm hoping they use animatronics more, not so much CG. All I just want to see is Gremlins 3. The original cast back, most importantly. I know it's been a long time, but these films were great. I grew up watching them, and I can still grow up and watch them even more at this day and age, and they still hold up well. So all I could say is, if anything goes wrong with your computer, house, or anything, just be sure to check. It might just be a gremlin living in your house. Yep, great series. Great comedy and great horror at the same time. Yep, can't say much more there. Alright, well, before I get to number one, a few honorable mentions here and there. Scary Movie. The first one, obviously, yes. I will admit this series actually didn't get a bad start. I wasn't initially a big fan of this franchise. I mean, it wasn't until, of course, 4th and 5th and all this series got really ridiculous, and pretty much the rest of these comedy spoof movies just got to the point of absolute abomination. But this one, I'll cut some slack. That's why it's at an honorable mention spot. I mean, it does parody a lot of favorites like Scream, Scream 2, Sixth Sense, Blair Witch, I Know What You Did Last Summer, so I will give credit, I did get a few laughs out of it. It was bizarre, but yet amusing at the same time. It's on the scale of guilty pleasure, to say the least, so watchable for some parts. But overall, not great, but again, that's why it's at an honorable mention spot. Beetlejuice. Yes, the Tim Burton classic that nobody expected to be that great, and I think it still holds up well for today's standards. Yes, it can be a little frightening at some times, and it's probably right next to Pee-wee's Big Adventure, at least with the Large Marge scene. Yeah, it can be kind of terrifying. Michael Keaton's performance is pretty much the first versatile performance that he's ever portrayed in any film. And this was a year before he, of course, he portrayed the Cape Crusader in the Tim Burton film, which coincidentally is by the same director himself, Dark Visionaryist. The visionary styles behind this movie are fantastic. And he's not only the greatest actor in this movie, you got Gina Davis, Alec Baldwin, who are great, Winona Ryder. It does great in every bit of level possible, and the music and everything, and the humor behind his character is great. I mean, he shows that he can be versatile as ever, and not the only time, of course, especially under this director. So, in other words, just say the name 3 times, and he'll come to life. Does just that. And it was so popular that, well, there's talks of a sequel, which, well, has been said to be canceled, but now is said to be actually being in the works. And, well, there was a TV series, which is great, but let's not get too carried away. Great horror comedy directed by Dark Visionaryist himself. Go see it for yourselves, people. Just say the name 3 times, and he'll come to life. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. Yeah. A rather generic-looking but surprisingly amusing horror comedy about a bunch of hillbilly-looking people that vacation in a dilapidated cabin, and while a bunch of college students come in and observe them, they get mistaken for a bunch of murderers, because, yeah, these kind of guys do look like murderers, don't they? I mean, chainsaws and stuff. And a bunch of hijinks ensue, which you get laughs at. I mean, it's gruesome, but who doesn't laugh at that? Especially the part with the frickin' chipper. I mean, God, it's so gruesome, but at the same time, it's hilarious. I mean, these actors just pull it off. Yes, that's the same guy who plays Steve the Pirate from Dodgeball. Not much to say there. Gruesome good time right there. And the number 1 best horror comedy is, in my opinion, people, you probably know what it is. Ghostbusters. Thank you. Yes, the 1984 classic that brings four of the greatest Saturday Night Live comedians together, directed by Ivan Reitman himself, who also did Stripes, which coincidentally starred Harold Ramis and Bill Murray, and yep, he starred in this film as Peter Venkman, the real wise guy ladies man, Harold Ramis as Egon, the genius guy who brings up all the scientific jargon, Ernie Hudson, who of course is the cool guy with all the common sense and translates all the tough to understand information, and of course Dan Aykroyd, the guy who panics and questions all situations that occur. Yes, these four guys come together in a terrific chemistry and go into business for themselves, and, well, business starts out slow, and then eventually starts booming. They become instant celebrities, but of course, against the will of the EPA guy, but otherwise, the story pretty much writes itself. What makes this film so great is the chemistry between these characters. And not only the special effects, which still hold up well for today's standards. I mean, you have all the great effects from Ghost, which can be pretty terrifying to say the least, like the librarian, Slimer, who's pretty funny and amusing at the same time. And it's just the fact that it's not only funny, but it does take itself seriously at the same time. Like, they don't know for sure if the proton packs are going to work at first, and then they say, like, you know, don't cross the streams because it could be bad. And they realize that New York City and the whole world itself eventually is going to go to hell because of a ghost called Evil Shandor that's planning on bringing forth the apocalypse. And, well, it's up to the Ghostbusters to try to stop them. But along the way, they come across some adventures of catching ghosts all around the city, and they put them in a storage containment unit that's located in New York City. Yes, that firehouse still stands today, but that's the outside part of it, of course. The inside was filmed somewhere in Los Angeles, but most of the locations are in New York City. And, yeah, that's what makes this film all along great. The soundtrack, the music score itself is fantastic. It's perfectly fitting for this type of atmosphere. I love the comedy, especially behind Bill Murray. In fact, all four of the characters have plenty funny, quotable, memorable lines that make this film so memorable. Even Rick Moranis himself does a great job as Dana Barrett's apartment neighbor, which of course becomes the center of the whole thing with the end of the world. So, yeah, they have their part in the movie, so does Annie Potts as the receptionist. I just loved everything about this movie. It's perfect in every way possible. It's rewatchable every sense of the way. I mean, I couldn't even believe that they would dare remake this movie after there's been talk of a third movie, which, thank the Lord, is actually happening. And you can imagine how excited I am. I already did a video about it, you know, how they're pretty much throwing that 2016 reboot under the bus, because I have nothing against women trying to be funny. It's just it wasn't. I mean, it was just done wrong. Trying to replace these actors, especially after the death of Harold Ramis, just felt so insulting. I mean, he was the centerpiece of this film, along with the other three actors. I mean, it's just what made it worth it. Yes, there was even an attraction at Universal Florida, which actually did sort of make a return in Universal Horror Nights. A video game, which I'm glad got remastered, especially on Nintendo Switch. And yeah, that was a great game. It was a great trip to my childhood that I grew up with these Ghostbusters. There was an animated series called The Real Ghostbusters and a couple others that really weren't anything related to it, but that was the classic series and the characters were still great. But otherwise, this is a fantastic horror comedy that is perfect in every way possible. I can't stress how much more. If you haven't seen it, go see it for yourself. It's mentioned in Zombieland. It's mentioned in pretty much any film that shows this, and it's just great. It's a great character casting, and that's what makes this film what it is. Not the special effects, which still hold up great for today's standards, as I said before, but a great cast and a great direction that makes this film #1 best horror comedy. So, that's my list right there. Till next time, keep watching.